Bonjour, bonjour les amis. Bienvenue à Lille. Welcome to Lille in northern France. We're not very far from the Belgian border here. We lucked out with the weather. The snow never showed up. Rain has been holding off for now at least. And we've even had blue skies. Bonjour les amis, thank you for joining me. We are going to ring in the new year together. It's 5 p.m. in France on December 31st of 2020. The last day of a very challenging year. And I thought we needed some sparkles and some lights and a beautiful city to say goodbye to 2020 in style, because that is how we roll. I am standing in beautiful Lille right now in the heart of the town, of the city, in front of one of the oldest buildings in the city. It's known as le Palais Rihour, R-I-H-O-U-R. It was built in the late 15th century, burned down a few times. They added on to it through the following centuries. So today you really don't have much left of what was once a giant palace when Lille belonged to the Dukes of Burgundy. I am going to move forward towards the center of the city where I'm taking you. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Véro. I am a multitasker, a French language instructor, a tour guide, a long-time travel blogger, and my business is called francewithvero, and what I do is I share Paris and the rest of France with you whenever I can. 10 days ago, you may remember we were in beautiful Tours in the Loire Valley. Today we have traveled north. We are just a few miles away from the French-Belgian border, in fact. In the beautiful city of Lille, roughly 235,000 people live here. And the reason we're here is because Lille has a great history. It's a fascinating city. Lille is a survivor. And just a heads up, I may be biased when I describe Lille because I used to live here as a child for 6 years or so. And of all the cities in France where my parents and our family have lived, they look back at their years in Le Nord, northern France, as their favorite years, probably because of the people. The people of Lille, les Ch'tis, as they are nicknamed, are famous for their hospitality, conviviality. Do not be surprised to see people outside tonight. We have a curfew. We have to be back home by 8 p.m., but don't be surprised to see a lot of Lillois and locals right here enjoying a drink in the street. The cafes and restaurants have been closed for weeks. In this city, it's particularly a big deal because they love spending time in their cafes and restaurants. Beer is a big thing in here. It rains a lot in this city. La grisaille is part of life. And so for them to not have a place to meet indoors is a big blow. But you will see that they are still outside and still enjoying their time outside. We are now in a street that is giving you a bit of an introduction to all the architectural styles we're going to see. On the left-hand side, more of an ornate style we'll be talking about in a few minutes. And on the right-hand side of the same street, some facades that are a little bit more classical, maybe, a little less ornate. And this is basically Lille and its architectural style summarized here. And we will see why in a few minutes. Bonjour à tous, thank you for joining me. I see we have 200 people here, that's wonderful, especially since this is not a weekend. Thank you for taking the time to join me for our last live stream stroll of the year. And you will see that Lille is doing a great job at keeping things festive. Here we are in the heart of the city, on the big square known as la Grande Place. After World War II, it was named after a famous local son, Charles de Gaulle. He was born in this city at his maternal grandparents' home, and he came here in the summer often. He was always inspired by northern France, where he grew up and studied as well. And this square is named after him, but most of locals will call it La Grande Place still. And you will see similar squares in other cities in northern France. You will see them in Belgium as well. I'm going to walk around. We have quite a few people here. And I will tell you a little bit more about Lille. One thing you may notice, let me step back here out of the commotion a little bit. There we go. You may notice this Ferris wheel is gorgeous, magnificent. It's a tradition here for Christmas, but it sits empty. And that is great that they did this, because everything has been closed for weeks. Every cultural place, museums, landmarks, everything's closed. But the gentleman who owns the Ferris wheel talked to the mayor, and they decided together that the Lillois would still have their Ferris wheel for Christmas, even if for social distancing reasons they wouldn't be allowed to actually use it. So we have a Ferris wheel that sits empty, but I think it's great of them to try and keep morale up in this very challenging year. This square has been here since the Middle Ages. Lille, the city itself, was born around the 11th century, and it was part of a region known as Flanders. Today we refer to Flanders as the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium, but at the time Flanders was a pretty big territory that would roughly include Belgium today, northern France, and even part of the Netherlands. And the Counts of Flanders ruled fairly independently, though because Lille had such a strategic location, European kings tried to get a hold of Lille. This city, my friends, has been besieged 12 times in the course of its history, and it's been occupied at least twice during World War II and World War I and World War II. It was occupied and suffered a great deal from bombings during both world wars. This city is a survivor. If you haven't been to Lille, if you haven't come here in the last 10, 15 years, 20 years, you probably would not recognize some of the sections I'm going to show you today, because the city has done so much work over the last 20 and 30 years, renovating its old town, Le Vieux Lille, its facades, really proud of its past, that to some people it's unrecognizable. So in all these cities in northern France and in Belgium, La Grande Place is really the heart of town. This is where you would have a market in medieval times. In fact, in medieval times, Lille was, this Grande Place was so large that none of these buildings would be there, so it would continue on the other side there. Today we have La Grande Place, where we are, and La Petite Place, which is on the other side of these buildings. At the time it was immense, and it has seen a lot, from military parades to religious processions to executions, because in the Middle Ages this is where they would execute people. So if La Grande Place could talk, La Grande Place would have a lot of great stories to tell. I'm going to spend a little bit of time here and tell you a little bit more about what you see. I came here early at 5 o'clock because I wanted you to see the facades. It's gorgeous at night, but you wouldn't be able to see the details quite as much. So right now you'll be able to see more. But I have no doubt nighttime is going to catch up with us anyway. Bonne année à tous, Happy New Year. Like I said, this is our last live stream stroll. I think I'll say a quick little hello. voila, I am wearing my brand new orange hat. See the pom-pom? You do. And I did this because they said it would be snowing last night and into today. And I thought I'd be doing this walk either with snow or with rain. And I was prepared. So I got myself a new hat in my favorite color. It kind of defeats the purpose of going around discreetly as I like to do while I'm holding this camera. But hey, at least my ears are very, very warm. So hello to all of you. Okay, where should we start? Like I said, Lille was coveted by many European powers, or several European powers, of course, including France. But get this, Lille did not become French until the 17th century. And it was Burgundian at some point, it was Spanish at some point, briefly Austrian, finally became French in the 17th century when Louis XIV, the Sun King, rolled in. The interesting part about Lille is that the architecture, the local architecture, is well known as the Flemish style, and that is what you would see through northern France and Belgium. But when the city was occupied by the Spaniards, the style didn't change. It was this architecture that dominated, the Flemish style. However, when Louis XIV rolled in, as you can imagine, he wanted things a bit different. The first thing he did was to ask one of his favorite engineers, the famous Vauban, to build a citadel to protect his beautiful city. And Vauban built those all over France. But it is rumored, I think, that the Lille citadel, which is still here today, was his favorite. So I will show you now some buildings that really illustrate what the Flemish architectural style was and still is. And it is a style that Louis XIV could not get rid of. What happened is that he brought in the French architectural style that he liked, more classical, straight lines. But eventually the two styles blended. And that's really interesting in Lille. So let's look at these here. Pardon, monsieur, excusez-moi.
Oui, pardon.
Merci, monsieur. First time I've heard somebody not speak French today. That's unusual. There aren't many people in town who are not from France. All right, so let's look at this row of houses. We just walked through the street, if you recognize it. And we are now in the heart of Lille on La Grande Place. Now look at those beautiful buildings. These are pure Flemish style. They called it the Neo or the Renaissance Flemish style when it came out in the 17th century in reaction to what the French had brought. And you can see that it's very exuberant. Some people would call it Baroque. The facades are tainted or painted in a yellowish tone. They use brick as accents. And look at all the vertical lines on all these houses. These are very narrow, very high houses. They were individual homes. So this is what people like to do here. And then Louis XIV arrived and he brought in his taste in architecture. For example, this building, which is now the theater, is much more classical in style. Do you see it? You don't have any of the exuberance I just showed you on those other facades. I'm not ignoring you if you're saying hello. I'm focusing on maneuvering around this crowd and telling you my stories and showing you the buildings I like around here. So this is the theater, much more French in inspiration. So Lille became French in 1667. And one of the first things that the French did is they made it mandatory for people who lived around here and built around the square to ask for permission from the city before designing a building. And by doing this, they ensured that there would be something quite pleasing to the eye. Even if the buildings are a little different in their inspiration, you can see that when you look at this row here, it all blends in, it's beautiful. And this has been the case since the late 17th century, since Lille became French. Now, this is probably the most beautiful building in town. It is known as La Vieille Bourse, the old commodity exchange. Lille, the wealth of the city, came from the textile industry, or I should say in the Middle Ages, the cloth merchants who would buy wool from other countries and create fabric with it and sell it all over Europe. So we had some pretty wealthy people here through the Middle Ages. Late 17th century through the 18th century, very prosperous city, very well known in this region, Flanders. And this building was created when the merchants requested from the King of Spain, remember they were Spanish before they were French, they requested to have a building where they could trade. And this became the Commodity Exchange Building. And the style is pure Baroque, this Flemish Renaissance style I was talking about. Do you see how ornate it is? Now, something interesting with a lot of buildings in Lille is that the first level, which you see here, what we will call rez-de-chaussée, which is the ground floor, or for Americans, first floor, is made of sandstone. So the color is gray. And then the top floors will be a combination of white stone, often painted in those ochre yellowish tones, and the brick accents. And then the way that you would show your individuality, since there were such strict rules to build by the end of the late 17th century after this building was erected, you would add a lot of detail. You would add caryatids, those sculptures representing women very often. You would have fruit carvings, coat of arms. So very interesting what they did with the facades. So picture 24 homes. These are homes that belong to these merchants. The King of Spain allowed them to build this. And they go all around. It's a square with 4 entrances. And after a while, of course, it was replaced by a different building. They outgrew it. But today, it is still one of the most beautiful, if not the most beautiful building in town. It's been heavily renovated in the 90s with private funds only and corporate sponsors. But if you go inside, it feels pretty much the way it did back then, because you have an inner courtyard, which was always a public space, even in the old days, and a covered gallery. And today you have some bouquinistes here. I don't want to shout in here. I feel like I'm shouting outside with all the noise. So, of course, a lot of the bouquinistes are closed today. But you can see this covered gallery. The bouquinistes are here, some of them, about half of them. And they sell some pretty cool stuff. And then you have the 4 entrances. This is one of them. We just came through this one. The beautiful gallery. And on top are the houses where those merchants were. You see their homes? 24 of them. So of course they did a lot of work on the building over, it was erected in the mid 17th century. A lot was added. At some point in time, there was a statue of Napoleon right here in the middle. Imagine that, right here. It's gone now. Easier to go around it. This is a very popular place in town. A lot of people come here to take photos and capture the beautiful architecture. There are statues. All of the statues were added in the 19th century. So they kept working on it. And you can see the bouquiniste. And now you can say you've seen bouquiniste outside Paris. That's right, there were 24 homes around here. Let me step back outside because I want to show you a little bit more about the square. And then we'll walk around it and go to the Petite Place, the smaller square next to it. What I love about coming to Lille is that you immediately know you're outside Paris, first of all, and you're also in a very different area in France. And it's a great area to realize the diversity of France in terms of architecture, in terms of traditions, language, food. A lot of people go to Alsace, but if you travel around Lille and this beautiful region known as les Hauts-de-France, you will also see how different it is. Look at this one. This is a much newer building, but the roof line there, quite typical of what you would find in northern France and even in Belgium. This belongs to La Voix du Nord. La Voix du Nord. You see the name on the facade right here? This is the name of the big newspaper in the area, regional newspaper. It used to be called L'Écho du Nord when the building was erected in the 1930s. It's a beautiful building in its own right. But see how you have all these styles. So I showed you the theater, which is right here. That's the French style. Over here, you have the Flemish style, all these houses. And then you have more of the Flemish style in what was one of the early buildings on this square here in the 17th century with the old La Vieille Bourse. And then the ones that follow it over there. So you have all these different styles, and the same can be said about Lille. You just walk around the streets and you will see very different styles mixing in. Now, two more things to tell you about this big square if you come to Lille. When you come to Lille, La Grande Braderie is the biggest party in town. It happens the first weekend in September. And it is a reenactment, really, of the medieval fair that used to happen here. And it is a huge party, tens of thousands of people coming from all over, from Belgium, from northern France, from everywhere. Heaps of mussel shells, because they eat, you know, the famous moule frites, and beer. We are in beer country and beer territory here. So La Grande Braderie is definitely a must-do. I know I went a couple times when I was younger, when we lived here. There is also a famous bookstore, the largest bookstore in France and one of the largest in Europe is called Le Furet du Nord. Le Furet du Nord. And it sits right on the other side of the, I'll cross one more time, right on the other side of the Ferris wheel here. So make sure to visit Le Furet du Nord. It's a great thing to do if it's raining outside, which, let's face it, can happen. And does happen. So I'll show you where it is. I mean, the lights are clearly enhancing all these facades. They look absolutely magnificent. So you see the red signs here, the 4 banners. It says Furet du Nord. This is the bookstore. Both buildings belong to the bookstore. And there is a sign here for the Hotel Bellevue, the only hotel on the square. The entrance is actually on the other side of that street. So if you want to stay right on La Grande Place, you could book a room at the beautiful Hotel Bellevue. It's been here for a really long time. And climb up the stairs and watch and visit this wonderful bookstore where I spent a little bit of time earlier today. You also have a McDonald's if you get hungry. But personally, I would just cross the square and go to that section over there, and you have one of these little shops that you see a lot here. They just sell French fries. You see that all over northern France and Belgium, either out of a truck, a food truck, or out of a store, a little boutique like this. They give you a cone filled with French fries, the big fat French fries, and which are Belgian, by the way. And then they give you a side order of mayo, and you just walk around and dip your French fries in mayo. So you can choose McDonald's or La Friterie, which is over there. Let's take one last peek at this gorgeous commodity exchange building, La Vieille Bourse. And La Voie du Nord, not bad either. And then we will walk around to La Petite Place, and my plan today is to take you to Le Vieux Lille, the Old Lille, the section of town that was literally saved from ruin, like so many neighborhoods in France after World War II that were left to rot through the 60s and were saved just in time before destruction rolled in. And Lille has this fantastic neighborhood here. I see some of you saying, I'll take the frites. Good choice. Look at the details on the facade. Pretty soon it'll be too dark to see it very well. Do you see? So one last peek at La Grande Place. Very easy walk from the train station. Lille has 2 train stations, the TGV train station and the old train station. And it's a 10-minute walk from here. So you can walk straight from the train station here when you arrive. It's very easy to locate. I want to walk this way because I want to show you something. The shop at the corner here on the right-hand side with the red awning is a local business that has made it big around France and around the world. It is a boulangerie called Paul, P-A-U-L. And some purists will tell you, oh, it's industrial bread, it's industrial pastries. Yeah, well, it's also a lifesaver when you travel by train and you find them in a train station. And this shop here is one of the original ones. The business was born right outside Lille. You see they already have les galettes des rois, the king's cake, a tradition in France for the Epiphany, which is coming. They're just a few days early. Pure butter, puff pastry, almond cream filling, and the crown, because whoever finds the trinket inside gets to be the king or queen and chooses their king or queen. And this original store, which is nothing much right now because we're not allowed to sit in it anymore, has original ceilings from the 19th century. Do you see these beautiful ceilings? The walls are made of ceramics. The floor are absolutely gorgeous. This is the prettiest Paul boulangerie you will ever see in France. So I just wanted to point it out so you can see it and buy something here. And here we are on La Petite Place, the smaller square. Remember, this was all one square really in the Middle Ages. And our commodity exchange building is right here, La Vieille Bourse, separating it in half, right? And look at this. Now, interestingly, those two buildings were erected after World War I. Like I said, Lille was occupied during both World Wars and heavily bombed, especially this section. So the section starting here all the way to the train station, which would be on the right over there. Entire buildings torn down. And when they rebuilt, the same architect did these two buildings. This is the Opera House, modeled after Opéra Garnier. It's beautiful. And this, in a completely different style, that reminds you of the Flemish style, is the, well, what is today the Chamber of Commerce. But at some point in time, it was the City Hall. It was other things as well. You see this belfry. We call this beffroi in French. Very representative of the architecture in northern France and Belgium. There is a carillon inside. The bells, you can read, it rings once in a while, so hopefully we'll hear it. Right now I hear street musicians, but the belfry is quite pretty and you can see it from everywhere in the old town almost. There is another famous belfry here that you can climb. It's the one at the Hotel de Ville in a different neighborhood. Now, when you stand here, let's not get run over. When you stand here, you can see the only street in Lille that will remind you of Haussmannian style buildings or Paris, and it's right here, La Rue Fédère. It's the street that takes you to the train station, the old train station. And I don't know that the station is lit up. It's probably not, but it sits right there at the end of the street. So literally it's a 10-minute walk from the train station along La Rue Fédère, and then you turn left here and you will be on La Grande Place. Do you see those buildings? That will probably remind you of Haussmannian Paris. Keep in mind, this whole section was completely destroyed, pelted by shells during World War I. When they rebuilt it in the 19th century style. So Lille has done a lot of that. When they had to rebuild, they chose the style. Sometimes they just renovated. Sometimes they went back to the past. Like here, we are in 19th century Lille here. And then we turn around and we have a completely different take here. The Opera House. And the beautiful belfry of the Chamber of Commerce. If you went inside, this building is grandiose inside. I went 2 years ago, it's beautiful. Nobody can climb up this belfry, but you can climb up the other one at the Hotel de Ville. This is the back of your commodity exchange, the one we just walked through. One of the entrances is here. So we are on a Petite Place, little square. We left La Grande Place. If you just joined us, we are in beautiful Lille in northern France, a few kilometers away from the Belgian border. A city that came back from a lot of struggles, economic, political, survived wars. Oh, here's the carillon. Thank you very much. What good timing. And look, if I turn my head here, by the commodity exchange, I can take a peek at la Grande Place, the big square, and our Ferris wheel. I'm holding my glasses, see? Because they're fogging up so much, I can't see anything. Fortunately, I know my way around. Otherwise, it could be tricky. What I want you to picture is that in normal circumstances, when you come back, hopefully by the time you come back, if you come to Lille, there would be so many terraces, so many chairs and tables outside. All strictly regulated, mind you. Like I said, the city have their say on everything. But see those umbrellas, those empty spots here? There would be people sitting outside, conversing, taking their times, living life en terrasse. And the same thing would apply to la Grande Place. It would be a completely different atmosphere. Though I think Lille successfully pulled off the holidays this year in spite of everything. And I'm not surprised. We are now headed for Le Vieux Lille, the Old Lille, where we will see more beautiful facades, interesting facades, and this is where we will wrap up this wall. In case you are joining us for the first time, there is a way you can support my business so I continue sharing this type of events, live strolls on social media and other things as well, is by joining the club, the francewithvero club, for a small contribution each month. And by doing that, you unlock so many rewards. I can tell you that after the stroll in a few days, my club members will enjoy photos of Lille and extra content. I filmed the video for them earlier today, and so I will be sharing that. So consider doing that. You can find me on Patreon, patreon.com/FrenchGirlInSeattle. This is where you find the club, and all that information will be in the video notes as soon as I come off the air. So just come back on Facebook and you'll find it. Now look at these facades. It's getting a little dark now. I wanted to show you some details on the facades, but you can't really see much. There are cherubs at the top of this one. Maybe we'll see more of them in another section. I hope so, at least. So if you're ready, let's head for Le Vieux Lille, the old part of town. And like I said earlier, if you haven't been here for 10, 15, 20 years, you are in for a big shock. You are not going to recognize this section of the city. It is just beautiful. It's become gentrified. Prices are skyrocketing if you want to live in this section of town. Lots of shishi boutiques, high-end boutiques. The only problem with nighttime strolls is that I have a hard time showing you the street signs, which I know some of you like to see. This is Rue de la Grande Chaussée, one of the oldest streets in town that used to connect the original heart of the town by the cathedral. We will not see it today. It's a really cool cathedral, very interesting. And the section where we were, La Grande Place. Do you see those sculptures right above the street sign? They represent twisted cloth, and this is a tribute to all the cloth merchants that made the city so wealthy. So you see those on a lot of the buildings. So Rue de la Grande Chaussée. So what this is beautifully preserved facades, a lot of them dating back to the 17th and 18th century, and beautiful boutiques right under them. Now, caveat when you walk in Lille, cobblestones, les pavés, the famous pavés du Nord, and they can be quite uneven. And when it rains, they get really slippery. So make sure to wear comfortable shoes in Lille, because otherwise you will be very, very unhappy. I'm not even going to stop and show you the boutiques, because there are sadly a lot of chains, French and international chains, nothing unusual. But what we are interested in is the architecture and the feel for the street. It's really quiet today because it's December 31st, but yesterday there were a lot of people walking around and shopping. And I'm expecting stores to close any time now because it's after 5 and they probably want to go home and celebrate the end of this year in style. Now, one of the perks of doing a nighttime stroll is to see the inside of apartments. Would you look at the inside of this apartment, which I'm sure is extremely expensive to rent or buy. The height of the ceilings, the beams, this is really beautiful. Now, do you see how these facades are a lot more, they're classical in style, not as ornate as the ones we saw in the Flemish style. These are 18th century, and in the 18th century, the French style kind of took over a little bit. And the only way you would add some interesting details would be with the wrought iron. So a lot of these buildings here have pretty wrought iron balconies outside the windows, but other than that, you can see there are no colors on the facade, much more classical architecture, much more elegant looking than what we saw earlier. And that was inspired by the French style once the French took over the city in the 1660s. But you still have the sandstone, the gray sandstone, le grès in French, G-R-E-S. That was typical of the architecture here. In fact, when both styles blended, the French style and the Flemish style, they came up with a name for it. It was called the Franco-Lillois style. And you will not find it in major architecture books for French architectural style, but you would probably find it under regional architectural style. The Franco for French, Lillois style. It's quite nice actually. There were too many people around yesterday. Bonjour, if you just came in, we are walking or strolling around Lille, the beautiful city of Lille in northern France. We are now in Le Vieux Lille, the old town. Now, Le Vieux Lille is a bunch of streets connected by small squares. Sometimes you get on and off a square without even realizing it. This street here, you see this business? À l'Huîtrière, huître is an oyster. L'Huîtrière was an iconic business in Lille for many generations. It was first a fishmonger, and then it became, which was somewhere in the street, right here, and then it became a restaurant that used to be right here. And look at the Art Deco style, the beautiful ceramics. Unfortunately, it closed. It went under 4 or 5 years ago. And it just sat here without anything happening. And apparently they have now leased out the building to a major brand. I wonder if it's Louis Vuitton. But whatever they do in there, they cannot change the facade and they cannot change the interior as either, because it's all protected. L'Huîtrière is the name. Now you see cars in the old town. Cars are prohibited on the weekends, which is great. But because today is Thursday, they are still going around. This street is named after hunched cats. And the reason is there used to be tanneries here, and the tanners would take out the animal hides and would hang them out to dry on their shop signs, like this one, for example. And so as it dried, the animal hide would kind of shrink, and in the distance it would look like a hunched cat. And to remind us of this, you have one of the boutique signs here that represents a black cat standing on top of a pot with flowers on it. So yeah, we have some hunched cats as well around here. And I'm watching my step because the pavé, the cobblestones, are very uneven. More of the pretty facades here. Now, do you see how in the Flemish style, once the French style arrived, they started separating homes with a brick structure like this? So each of these would be a separate home, built very high, but separated by these. So that was something they did at the time. And on the right-hand side, we come upon one of the little squares, la Place des Patiniers. Les patiniers, patiniers. Those guys would make shoes at the time in the Middle Ages. Not pretty shoes, but very sturdy shoes. So I want to show you these two buildings here. Do you remember when we were in Tours in the Loire Valley 10 days ago, we saw a lot of half-timbered homes looking very medieval from the late 15th century. Here in Lille, you will not find these. Why? Because in the early 17th century, the city prohibited using wood on the facades. There had been so many fires in the city, they were trying to stop that. So if there was wood left on the facades, eventually what happened is the wood, you know, they would protect it and they would add some things like brick to make the facade sturdier. I mean, you can still see some wood on the facade, but most of it is supported by bricks in this case. And this is probably one of the oldest homes in this section. But it looks very different from what we saw in Tours. And La Place des Patiniers, the little square I was telling you about, is right there. So it's nothing much, but if the restaurants were open, you would see people sitting outside. Today it looks just very quiet. One more square. And then we are going to fall into another square right away. So the boutiques are really pretty. Allez-y les garçons, allez-y, vous ne me gênez pas. Bonne année, merci, au revoir. The polite young man. So we are coming upon another little square. Very tiny. This one's named after a lion. I forgot the exact name and I can't read it because I'm holding my glasses. Ooh, we must have a Parisian in town. And I'm taking you to the square where I'm going to wrap up. There are many streets in the old town, and I want you to picture Lille when it was a thriving city based on trade, really. Off of the Deule River, D-E-U-L-E, all the canals they built in the town. So this section would be crisscrossed with canals. And in the 19th century, they filled them up, they buried them. They were extremely unsanitary. And there were two ports. And the ports disappeared as well. So it looks pretty different from what it looked like in the Middle Ages and later. The square we're arriving on now is La Place Louise de Bretigny. And she was a famous member of the Resistance during World War I. Yeah, when people honk, you know you're in Paris or another big city in the world. So when I was here 2 years ago, my last visit, This square had tons of cars parked into it. And so this is a sign that, Lille continues changing and improving itself and getting more pedestrian friendly, because now, look at this, no cars. And this is a great square to look at the beautiful styles that Lille developed, architectural styles in the 17th century. They're all a little different, but they all blend in. Look at this one with the steep roof line. We saw that earlier. Now, if I continued and followed this street over there, I would reach one of my favorite streets called Rue de Gand, G-A-N-D, it's a city. And right behind it is a gate, one of the gates that used to enable people to come inside the city, because Lille was a walled city through most of the Middle Ages and longer. So, unfortunately, La Rue de Gand is mostly well known now for all of its restaurants. They call them estaminets, but as you can guess, this being for a few more hours, December of 2020, none of these restaurants are open now. But if you come to Lille, when you come to Lille, in the summer, that street, La Rue de Gand, is pedestrian only, and you can go easily from the old town and have a great dinner there in one of the estaminets. And I gotta warn you, it's a lot of hearty food, a lot of stews, a lot of hearty food, a lot of pungent cheese, beer to push it down, and you can expect, like always in northern France, a very convivial atmosphere. Packed seats, packed restaurants, that's what it's all about. This ugly area here is actually where one of the two ports was located. So the port would be here, and it would be linked through a long canal to the river that sat over there. And now it's an underground parking lot and a grassy area. The Lillois don't really like what they've done with this section. I wouldn't be surprised if they changed it eventually, because that is what they do. Now, I haven't told you that one of the people responsible for turning Lille into the thriving, dynamic, modern city it is today was one of their mayors. His name was Pierre Mauroy, and he was a socialist. In the 80s, he became the Prime Minister of France under François Mitterrand. And Pierre Mauroy is the one who refused to let go of this old part of town, and who found the way to restore it and to save it so that people would start moving back here, shops, businesses, restaurants, and this is what it's become today. He also made sure, being the Prime Minister of France for a while, that the TGV, which came out in the 80s, would go through Lille, and that changed everything. Because the day the TGV came here and they built a new train station for it, Lille became a great place. Once again, a strategic location if you wanted to reach Northern Europe or London, for example. So in 2004, the city became the European capital of culture, and it hasn't looked back since. We have some world-class museums here. The Museum of Fine Arts has incredible collections. We have, as you have seen, in part, some glorious architecture, wonderful history, lots of good stories to tell. I've only scratched the surface. Great shopping, and of course, wonderful food, beer, if you like beer, and the people of Lille. Last but not least, the people of Lille, les Lillois, les gens du Nord, who are so welcoming, really nice people. So make sure you come back, or come for the first time to Lille, and I think you will enjoy it. I will say a little word to you now. Can I take this off? I can. Woohoo! Oof, that feels good actually. I just want to say thank you for following me over the last few months, and for some of you for many, many years, for helping me launch and really grow this little business of mine, for enabling me to turn travel and teaching, my two passions, into a business. And I would not have been able to do this without you. So my plan in 2021 is to take you around Paris, of course, but also around France a lot more. I have a lot more great places to share and many more stories to tell. But until then, it's December 31st, so I need to say Happy New Year. We've earned a Happy New Year, all of us around the world. And to those of you who may have lost some loved ones this year and had really hard times, really hang in there. I know it's going to get better, maybe not tomorrow on January 1st, but things have got to go better in 2021. I know also that a lot of you were very sad about not being able to come to Paris and France this year. And it was really hard not to be able to take those flights and travel internationally, but hang in there, because I know we're getting closer. We're getting closer to just living as we enjoyed living so much. So Happy New Year, mes amis. Bonne année. I will see you on social media. Consider joining the club on January 1st, which is tomorrow. And I promise you some great content, wonderful live events on top of what you see here on social media. All that info will be in the video notes. If you've enjoyed this tour today with me, tips are gratefully accepted in the virtual tip jar on Venmo and on PayPal, and that information as well is in the video notes. So take care, friends, and I will see you very, very soon. Bonne année. Happy New Year.